At first, nothing feels strange. No alarms, no urgent messages. Just another faint dot drifting across a dark screen. Somewhere on Earth, in a quiet control room filled with low light and humming machines, a telescope records a moving point of light. It's small, cold, distant, almost easy to miss. They give it a name. 3IATLAS. A label, a number, a way to place it neatly into a system that has worked for decades. Another object passing through space, another visitor bound by gravity and time. At least, that's what it looks like. 3IATLAS appears during a routine sky survey. Automated systems scan the darkness every night, looking for movement against the fixed stars. Most of what they find is familiar. Asteroids, comets, debris left over from the birth of the solar system. This one moves calmly along the ecliptic, the same invisible plane that holds the planets, the same cosmic road traveled by countless objects before it. Its path is smooth, predictable, almost polite. No sudden turns, no wild acceleration, just a slow, steady fall toward the sun, toward perihelion. To the software, it's normal. To the charts, it makes sense. To the early reports, it's barely worth a second glance. And yet, there's a feeling. A pause that no algorithm can explain, because when astronomers trace its path backward, far beyond our solar system, the numbers don't line up the way they should. Its origin doesn't point to any known stellar nursery. It doesn't come from a familiar direction. It doesn't carry the messy randomness of natural debris. Instead, its trajectory feels clean. Too clean. Imagine throwing a stone into a river and watching it float downstream in a straight line, never spinning, never drifting, never touching the shore. That's what 3IATLAS feels like. A traveler that knows exactly where it's going. The data says it's interstellar. Only the third object ever confirmed to come from outside our solar system. That alone should be exciting, historic, celebrated. But excitement isn't what fills the room. It's silence, because interstellar objects usually arrive broken, scarred, shaped by millions of years of chaos. They tumble, they wobble, they flicker unevenly as they spin. This one doesn't. 3IATLAS moves like it has balance, like it's aligned. As days pass, more telescopes lock onto it. Observatories in different countries confirm the same measurements, the same speed, the same angle, the same quiet precision. No tail, no sudden gas release, no wild rotation, just motion. The kind of motion that feels intentional. Even if no one says that word out loud. At this stage, no one is panicking, no one is making bold claims. Because science doesn't jump to conclusions. It waits, it observes, it listens. But even waiting feels different this time, because when you look at where 3IATLAS came from, truly look, it doesn't point back to chaos. It points back to emptiness, a stretch of space with no obvious source. No parent star, no debris field, no gravitational slingshot, just darkness. And that raises a quiet question no one is ready to answer. How does something so precise come from nowhere? As the object draws closer, its brightness slowly increases, exactly as expected, exactly as models predict, still nothing dramatic. And yet, the sense of unease grows. Because discovery isn't always loud, sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes it's the feeling that the universe is behaving too well. 3IATLAS doesn't rush. It doesn't hesitate. It follows its path as if it was planned long ago. Perhaps before humans ever learned to look up. And here's the strangest part. If you didn't know better, you'd say it was waiting to be seen. Waiting for our telescopes to notice it. Waiting for our systems to log it. Waiting for us to assign it a name, as if recognition itself mattered. But that's impossible, right? Objects don't care if they're observed. Rocks don't care if they're named. And yet, something about this discovery feels less like an accident, and more like an introduction. The early reports describe 3IATLAS as unremarkable. That word appears again and again. Unremarkable. But history has taught us something dangerous about that word. The most important moments often arrive quietly. Without warning, without spectacle, they slip into records as footnotes. Until later. Until someone notices what doesn't fit. Until someone asks the wrong question, and that question is forming now. Not spoken aloud, not written in official reports, just whispered between lines of data. Why does this object feel so placed? As 3IATLAS continues its calm descent toward the sun, astronomers prepare for routine analysis. Light curves, spectral readings, thermal data, standard procedure, nothing to fear, nothing to explain. But deep down, beneath the calm voices and careful language, a subtle shift is happening. Because the universe has handed us something unfamiliar, wrapped in the shape of something ordinary. And those are always the moments that change everything. This is only the beginning. Because once the first real data arrives, once the light begins to flicker, once the numbers stop behaving, the quiet discovery will no longer be quiet, and the question will no longer be ignorable. What exactly did we just find? And why does it feel like it found us first? At first, the numbers look normal. Clean rows of data, steady timestamps, brightness values rising slowly as 3IATLAS moves closer to the sun. This is the part scientists trust the most. Light doesn't lie. At least, it never has before. Every object in space tells its story through light. How bright it is, how fast it spins, how rough its surface might be. Astronomers have read these stories for centuries. They call it the light curve. A simple idea, really. As an object rotates, different parts of its surface catch sunlight. Bright spots face us, then dark ones. The light goes up, then down. Over and over again. Messy objects create messy curves. Smooth objects create smooth ones. Natural objects always leave fingerprints. So when the first full light curve of 3IATLAS comes in, no one expects surprises. But then, someone notices it. A small inconsistency, barely visible at first. The curve rises, then falls, then pauses. Not noise, not error. A pause, they check again. Rerun the data, calibrate the instruments, same result. The brightness changes, but not the way it should. Instead of a smooth wave, the curve looks segmented, like it's holding its breath between movements. Up, flat. Down, flat. That doesn't happen, not naturally. Comets flicker wildly, asteroids wobble unpredictably. Interstellar debris should be chaotic, but this isn't chaos, it's restraint. As more observations come in, the pattern becomes clearer and more troubling. The light curve isn't random, it's repeating. Not perfectly, but close enough to make people uncomfortable. A rhythm begins to form, not fast, not dramatic, just consistent. The brightness increases by a precise amount, then stops, then decreases by nearly the same amount, then stops again. Almost like a signal that knows when to end. Some suggest a strange rotation, others blame an unusual shape. Maybe it's elongated, maybe it's hollow, maybe it's tumbling in a way we've never seen. Every explanation is tested, every model is run, and every one of them fails. Because no matter how they spin it, no matter how they stretch the math, the curve keeps doing something unnatural. It stabilizes. Natural objects don't stabilize their brightness. They don't self-correct. They don't care what angle they're at. But 3IATLAS behaves as if it does. As if it's aware of how it's being seen. That's when the word starts appearing in private notes. Anomaly. At first, it's written lightly, casually. Every scientist knows anomalies happen. Most of them disappear with better data. So they wait. They collect more light. From different telescopes, from different continents. Optical, Infrared, long exposure, short exposure, different instruments, same curve. The pauses remain, the rhythm holds, and now something else appears, a subtle dip in brightness that repeats at regular intervals, not tied to rotation, not tied to distance, just there, like a heartbeat hidden inside the light. No one wants to say it out loud, because the moment you name something, it becomes real. So instead they call it periodic variation. A safer phrase, a neutral phrase, but behind closed doors, the question grows louder. What kind of object controls how it reflects light? What kind of surface behaves the same way every time, regardless of angle? Reflectivity models are adjusted. Ice is tested. Dust clouds are simulated. Exotic materials are considered. Nothing fits. The curve refuses to behave. And that's when doubt spreads. Not fear, not panic, doubt. The kind that creeps in slowly, the kind that makes scientists double-check work they've trusted for years. Because if the light curve is wrong, then the assumptions are wrong. And if the assumptions are wrong, then maybe the object itself isn't what we think it is. The public doesn't hear about this yet. Official updates stay calm, carefully worded, boring by design. Further analysis ongoing. Unusual but inconclusive. More data required. But curiosity leaks through the cracks. Online forums light up. Amateur astronomers compare notes. Independent researchers start asking uncomfortable questions. Why does the brightness flatten out instead of fluctuating? Why does it repeat? Why does it look intentional? Some suggest rotation with flat panels. Others joke about mirrors. Most dismiss it, because the alternative feels absurd. And yet, history has taught us something about light. Every major cosmic discovery began with a curve that didn't make sense, stars that dimmed without reason, galaxies that spun too fast, radiation that shouldn't exist. Each time, the universe told us we were wrong, and we had to listen. Now, once again, light is whispering, and it's saying something unsettling, that our models, our expectations, our comfort with the unknown may not be enough. As 3IATLAS continues its journey inward, the curve tightens. The pauses become clearer, the rhythm sharper, not enough to be obvious, just enough to be undeniable. Something is shaping the light, not violently, not dramatically, calmly, precisely. And that might be the most frightening part, because chaos is easy to dismiss. But order demands explanation. And as scientists stare at the stubborn line on their screens, one thought lingers longer than it should. What if this isn't an anomaly at all? What if the light curve isn't broken, but revealing? Because if light is a language, and curves are its sentences, then 3IATLAS might not be malfunctioning. It might be speaking. And we're only just beginning to realize we don't understand the message. Light doesn't just bounce, it reveals. Every surface in space leaves a signature behind, a quiet fingerprint written in reflected sunlight. Ice scatters light unevenly, rock absorbs it, dust softens it. Time scars everything. That's how it's always been. So when the spectral data from 3IATLAS arrives, people lean closer to their screens because something is wrong, not broken, not noisy, too perfect. Spectral readings are like prisms. They split light into colors and tell us what an object is made of. Water ice leaves a familiar mark. So do carbon compounds. So does ancient rock baked by radiation. Astronomers expect roughness. They expect chaos. They expect age, but 3IATLAS doesn't look old. Its reflectivity curve is smooth, unnaturally smooth. No jagged spikes, no dusty dips, no signs of erosion, just a clean, even response across wavelengths, like sunlight is gliding across it instead of breaking apart. At first, the assumption is simple. Ice. A fresh, icy surface can reflect light cleanly. Maybe this object hasn't been weathered yet. Maybe it's young. Maybe it formed recently around another star and was thrown into space. That explanation works. For about 5 minutes. Because the reflectivity doesn't behave like ice. Ice absorbs certain wavelengths. It scatters others. It always shows imperfections, tiny fractures, uneven layers, trapped gas. This doesn't. The reflectivity stays consistent, almost polished. It doesn't spike where ice should. It doesn't fade where dust should. Instead, it reflects light evenly, calmly, as if every inch of its surface agrees on how to respond. That shouldn't happen naturally. Nothing in space stays that uniform. Cosmic radiation bombards everything. Micrometeoroids chip away at surfaces. Thermal stress cracks and warps materials over time. Even the moon bears scars. So what kind of object travels between stars for millions of years? And stays this smooth? The word mirror begins to appear. Not officially, not publicly, just as a comparison, because when light hits 3IATLAS, it doesn't scatter like a rock. It slides, as if the surface is engineered to reflect, not endure. New models are tested. Metallic compounds, crystalline structures, exotic ices formed under extreme pressure. Some come close, none match fully. The reflectivity is too even across too wide a range. It's not just reflective, it's controlled. As the object rotates, slowly, deliberately, the brightness barely changes. No deep shadows, no harsh glare, just balance, like the surface was made to minimize variation. That's when a quiet realization settles in. This object doesn't look like it's been shaped by time. It looks like it's been protected from it, and protection implies intention. The data spreads. More telescopes confirm the same readings. Different angles, different instruments, same result. A surface that refuses to age. The more scientists look, the less comfortable they become. Because even artificial satellites built by humans degrade quickly in space. Paint peels, metal pits. Radiation eats away at everything. Yet here is something that has crossed interstellar space and still reflects sunlight like it's fresh, untouched, unscarred. As if time itself slid off its skin. Some researchers suggest an explanation that sounds harmless. Maybe it's spinning extremely fast. Maybe centrifugal force smooths it out. Maybe we're seeing an illusion. But the rotation doesn't support it. Others suggest a cloud of gas creating a reflective shell. But gas doesn't behave like this. Gas diffuses, gas changes. This doesn't. It stays consistent, stable, almost calm. And calm is unsettling. Because nature is rarely calm. Nature is loud, violent, messy. Stars explode, planets collide, comets tear themselves apart. But 3IATLAS glides through sunlight without reaction. No flaring, no uneven heating, no rough edges, just presence. That's when someone asks a question no one wants to answer. What if reflectivity isn't a side effect, but a feature? What if the surface isn't meant to survive space, but to manage light? The thought feels dangerous. Because if that's true, then reflectivity isn't just about material. It's about purpose. Mirrors don't exist by accident. They are made to reflect, to direct light, to control it, to shape how something is seen. And suddenly, the idea that this object might be aware of observation, once dismissed as imagination, feels closer than anyone expected. Because reflectivity affects visibility. It affects detection. It affects how something announces itself. Or hides. A perfectly reflective surface could regulate heat. It could protect internal structures. It could even mask details from distant sensors. It could be armor, or camouflage, or something else entirely. The questions multiply. Why reflect so evenly? Why avoid absorption? Why present such a clean spectral profile? Every answer circles back to the same uncomfortable place: design. But no one says it publicly. Instead, reports become cautious. Language tightens. Unusual surface properties. Non-standard reflectance. Further analysis required. The words are careful, but the silence between them is loud, because science is built on comparison, and there is nothing to compare this to. Not comets, not asteroids, not known interstellar debris. 3IATLAS is alone in its category, a smooth stranger passing through a system built on scars. As it continues its slow approach toward the sun, its reflective surface does something else. It holds steady, even as solar intensity increases, even as radiation grows harsher. The reflectivity barely changes. No melting, no darkening, just endurance. As if it expected this, as if it was built for this moment. And that leads to the question that lingers long after the data is reviewed. What kind of object reflects sunlight like this, after traveling the cold between stars? What kind of traveler arrives without damage, without decay, without history written on its skin? Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's a rare, natural wonder we don't yet understand. Or maybe we're looking at a surface that was never meant to be natural at all. Because if light is information and reflection is choice, then 3IATLAS isn't just passing through our solar system, it's presenting itself. Carefully. Deliberately. And as its mirrored surface continues to shine, smooth, silent, and unreadable, one thought becomes harder to ignore. What if this object doesn't just reflect the sun? What if it's reflecting us? It starts small, so small that most people almost miss it. Buried inside the data, between thousands of lines of numbers. There's a tiny rise in brightness, then a fall, then silence. At first it looks like noise. Every telescope has noise. Every signal has interference. Every dataset has flaws, so no one panics. They smooth the curve, filter the background, remove atmospheric distortion, but when the noise is stripped away, the rise is still there. So is the fall, and then something stranger appears. It happens again. Not in the same place on the curve, but at the same interval. A soft pulse, almost gentle, like the object is breathing. Astronomers are trained to distrust patterns. The human brain loves patterns, even when none exist. So science demands proof, repetition, confirmation. So they wait. More data arrives the next night. Different telescope, different location, different sky. And there it is again. The same rise, the same fall, the same pause in between, a pulse repeating in time, not tied to rotation, not tied to distance, not tied to angle, just rhythm. That's when the room grows quiet, because randomness doesn't keep time. Nature is chaotic. Even its cycles are messy, but this isn't messy. The brightness of 3IATLAS increases by a precise amount, holds, then fades back down, over and over again, not perfectly, just close enough to feel intentional. Someone suggests a tumbling motion. Maybe the object has internal cavities, maybe light is bouncing around inside it, so they model it. They simulate hollow structures. Irregular shapes, fractured interiors. Nothing produces a pulse like this. Others suggest outgassing jets of material briefly reflecting sunlight. But there's no plume, no tail, no chemical signature, nothing escaping. The object is silent. Except for the light. That's when the word pulse appears in internal notes. A dangerous word. Because pulse implies rhythm, and rhythm implies control. The pulses don't speed up, they don't slow down, they don't react to solar flares, they don't react to radiation spikes, they keep their pace, like a metronome set long ago. Across continents, observatories compare results. Chile sees it, Hawaii confirms it, Europe verifies it. Same timing, same pattern. Now coincidence becomes hard to defend. Because coincidence doesn't synchronize itself across the planet. The pulse isn't loud, it isn't flashy, it's subtle. Almost polite. As if it doesn't want to be noticed too quickly, as if it's testing something, testing us. And here's the part no one expected. When the data is overlaid with earlier observations, the pulse was there before. Fainter. Harder to see, but present. It didn't begin when we started watching closely, it was always there. We just weren't paying attention. That realization shifts something deep inside the room, because it means the pulse isn't reacting to observation, it's independent of it. Which raises a quiet, unsettling question. If the pulse isn't for us, then who or what is it for? Theories multiply. Thermal cycling, internal stresses, exotic physics we don't yet understand, all possible, all comforting. But none explain one detail that won't go away. The pulse spacing remains consistent, even as the object moves closer to the sun. Solar energy increases. Gravitational forces rise. Everything should change. But the pulse doesn't. It holds its timing like a promise. That's when a comparison slips out, half joking, half serious. It's like a beacon. The room laughs, then goes quiet, because no one actually believes it's funny. Beacons are built to be noticed, to repeat, to endure, and repetition is the key. Random processes don't repeat cleanly, but signals do. Even heartbeats aren't this steady. As the days pass, the pulse becomes clearer, still subtle, but undeniable. It doesn't transmit information in any known way. No modulation, no encoding. Just presence. Like a lighthouse rotating its beam, not caring who sees it. Only that it continues. The public still hears nothing. Official updates remain calm. But behind the scenes, scientists start asking different questions. Not what is causing the pulse, but why it exists at all. Because pulses waste energy. Nature avoids waste. So why spend effort maintaining rhythm in deep space? Why repeat when randomness would be easier? And then comes the most disturbing possibility of all. What if the pulse isn't active? What if it's passive, but intentional? A system set long ago, still running. Like a machine left on standby, no message, no demand, just proof of operation, proof that something is still functioning, after an unimaginable journey. As 3IATLAS moves deeper into the solar system, the pulse continues, calm, measured, uninterrupted. It doesn't speed up near the sun. It doesn't break down. It doesn't adapt. It simply persists. And persistence is not a trait of chaos. It's a trait of design. That's when coincidence officially dies. Because coincidence fades under scrutiny. Patterns survive it. And this pattern has survived everything we've thrown at it. Distance, time, different instruments, different observers. Still there, still pulsing, still refusing to explain itself. And now? A new question replaces all the others. If this is a signal, and it has been repeating long before we noticed, then the real mystery isn't what we're seeing. It's whether we were ever meant to see it at all. Because maybe this pulse isn't a greeting. Maybe it's not a warning. Maybe it's not even communication. Maybe it's simply evidence. Evidence that something crossed the darkness between stars, arrived intact, and is still quietly doing what it was built to do, whatever that may be. And as the pulse continues, steady, patient, and unreadable, one truth settles in. When patterns replace randomness, we are no longer looking at coincidence. We are looking at intent, and the universe has just reminded us that intent doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes It whispers. Heat is honest. In space, heat follows rules, simple rules, unforgiving rules. Get closer to the sun, you get hotter. Move away. You cool down. That's how it's always been. So when infrared data from 3IATLAS begins to arrive, no one expects surprises. Heat is predictable. Radiation is math. Temperature is truth. At least, it should be. The first thermal maps look ordinary. Faint warmth, cold edges, a gradual increase as the object drifts inward. Textbook behavior. But then something strange happens. A section of the surface cools, not slightly, not slowly. It cools sharply, at the exact moment it should be heating up. At first, the reading is dismissed. Instrument glitch, calibration error, background interference. Infrared sensors are sensitive. One bad pixel can change everything. So they reset the system, they recalibrate, they double-check, the same result appears again. A cool patch forming in sunlight. That doesn't make sense. Objects in space don't choose where to be warm. Heat spreads. Radiation doesn't hesitate. There's no pause, no preference. But 3IATLAS shows preference. One side warms, another cools. Then, minutes later, they switch. As if the object is redistributing heat, as if it's deciding. The next observation makes things worse. As 3IATLAS rotates, the temperature doesn't spike on the sunlit side the way models predict. Instead, it levels out. The heat is capped, like a ceiling no energy can break through. Then, when the surface turns away from the sun, when it should cool naturally, it stays warm. Not hot, not glowing, just steady, balanced. The thermal pattern looks less like a rock and more like regulation. And regulation is not natural. Comets overheat and erupt. Asteroids bake and freeze. They don't manage themselves. They don't resist physics. But 3IATLAS does. Infrared time-lapse shows waves of temperature moving across the surface, not spreading randomly, but flowing, like heat is being guided, redirected, contained. Someone describes it quietly, almost accidentally. It looks insulated. The word hangs in the air. Insulation implies layers, design, purpose. The team runs simulations. Could it be thick ice beneath a reflective shell? Could gas pockets be absorbing heat? Could strange materials formed near another star explain it? Each theory solves one piece and breaks three others. Because insulation doesn't explain warming in shadow, and reflectivity doesn't explain internal heat persistence, and natural materials don't explain timing.
The timing is the worst part, because the thermal shifts happen in sync with the pulse seen in the light curve. When the brightness pauses, the temperature adjusts. When the pulse rises, the heat redistributes. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to notice, too often to ignore. Now the room feels different, not tense, focused, because something is connecting the data. Light, heat, timing. Separate mysteries starting to overlap. That's when the question changes. It's no longer what is causing this. It becomes, what is this responding to? Heat regulation is expensive. It costs energy. Nature avoids cost whenever it can. So why spend energy managing temperature in the vacuum of space? Why not let the sun do its work? Unless uncontrolled heat is dangerous, unless something inside needs protection. The idea isn't spoken aloud, not yet, but it settles into the space between sentences, between breaths, between the hum of machines. The infrared data continues to arrive, and with each pass closer to the sun, the pattern holds. No runaway heating, no thermal shock, no breakdown, just calm adjustment. as if the object expected this environment, as if it was designed for approach, not survival by chance. Then comes the detail that chills everyone. The warm regions are not random, they cluster, not along cracks, not along ridges, but in symmetrical zones, repeating shapes, repeating positions, like a layout, like components arranged beneath the surface. The temperature map doesn't look geological, it looks architectural, and architecture implies interior. It implies space within. Suddenly, the idea of a solid rock feels naive, because solid rocks don't show compartmentalized heat. Machines do. The team hesitates. Words matter now. They replace surface temperature with thermal response. They replace hotspots with zones. Careful language, defensive language. Because everyone in the room feels it. The data is no longer describing an object. It's describing behavior. Behavior suggests function, and function suggests intent. Still, no one says it. Science doesn't leap. It crawls. But even crawling feels dangerous now, because every new dataset confirms the same thing. 3I/ATLAS is not passively heating. It is actively staying stable, like a spacecraft maintaining internal systems, like a life support shell guarding something fragile. That comparison is never written down, but it's felt. And fear doesn't enter the room, wonder does. Because if something crossed interstellar space with the ability to manage heat, then it crossed prepared. It crossed with foresight. It crossed knowing it would meet a star. As 3I/ATLAS nears perihelion, solar radiation intensifies. This should be the breaking point. This is where ice cracks, where rock fractures, where unknown objects reveal their weakness. But instead, the thermal patterns sharpen. The regulation becomes cleaner, more confident. Like a system working exactly as intended. That's when the most unsettling possibility emerges. What if the object isn't reacting to the sun? What if it's reacting to something else entirely? Internal thresholds, internal cycles, internal needs. What if the heat we see isn't just managed, but used to power something, to trigger something, to sustain something? The data doesn't say. It only shows restraint, control, intelligence, not in thought, but in design. A thinking pattern without thinking, a logic baked into matter. As the infrared maps glow softly on the screen, one scientist leans back and exhales. This thing, they say quietly, doesn't want to get too hot. That simple sentence changes everything, because wanting is not a property of rocks. Wanting implies preference, and preference implies intention. The official reports will later say, unexpected thermal behavior. Nothing more, but deep down, everyone knows the truth. This object is not burning the way it should. It's not freezing the way it should. It's choosing balance. And balance is rare in a universe built on extremes. As 3I/ATLAS continues inward, wrapped in its calm shell of regulated heat, one thought refuses to leave. If something is managing its own temperature, then something inside must matter. And if something inside matters, then this object is not just passing through our solar system. It's protecting itself, preparing, waiting. And the question that now haunts every screen, every model, every silent pause, is no longer hypothetical. Is this object thinking? Or worse, is it built to think for itself long after its makers are gone? By now, no one is working alone. The data doesn't belong to a single lab anymore. It belongs to the world. From mountain observatories to desert arrays, from space-based instruments drifting above the atmosphere, everyone is looking at the same thing and seeing the same problem. 3I/Atlas refuses to disagree. Chile confirms the pulse. Hawaii confirms the thermal balance. Europe confirms the smooth reflectivity. Different skies, different hardware, different teams, same results. This is usually the moment science breathes easy. Agreement means clarity. Consensus means progress. But this time, agreement feels heavier than doubt, because when every instrument says the same thing and no theory explains it, understanding doesn't grow, it collapses. Emails move faster now. Shorter sentences, fewer jokes. Screens glow late into the night as teams compare notes across time zones. There's no competition anymore. No rush to publish first. Only a shared confusion. Someone asks the obvious question: what if we're all wrong? It's a fair thought. In science, shared error is possible. Calibration standards can drift. Assumptions can align in the wrong direction. So they check the foundations. They verify reference stars. They reprocess raw signals. They strip the data down to its bones. Still the same. The light curve pauses. The pulse repeats. The heat regulates. No single observatory could fake that. No single bias could shape it. This is real, and that's the problem. Because reality no longer matches expectation. The meetings become quieter. People stop talking over each other, because when confusion spreads evenly, there's nothing left to argue about. A senior astronomer finally says what everyone is thinking. If this were a mistake, it wouldn't be this consistent. Silence follows. Consistency is the hallmark of truth, but it's also the hallmark of design. And design is not something science is comfortable accusing the universe of. At least, not without evidence. But what if the evidence is already here? What if it's just not shaped the way we expected? As the days pass, independent groups begin publishing preprints, not conclusions, just observations. Careful words, measured tones. But readers notice something strange. The papers don't contradict each other. They overlap perfectly. Same graphs, same curves, same unexplained behavior. Normally, this would be cause for celebration. Instead, it creates a quiet panic. Because when science agrees and still doesn't understand, where does belief go? Some retreat into math. They search for new physics, hidden variables, unseen forces. Others retreat into history. They looked at past moments when humanity misread the sky. The planets once seemed divine. Comets once meant disaster. Stars once felt eternal. We were wrong before. Maybe we're wrong again. But this feels different. Those mistakes came from lack of tools. This time, the tools are sharp. The data is clean, and the mystery remains. That's when the mood shifts. Not toward fear, but toward humility. Because there's something deeply unsettling about being united in ignorance. It strips away ego. It reminds everyone of the same truth. We don't own the universe. We just observe it. And sometimes, observation isn't enough. Late one night, the junior researcher notices something subtle. The data timestamps. taken from observatories thousands of miles apart, align too well. The pulse timing matches across the globe within fractions of a second. That shouldn't happen easily. Light travel delays, processing differences, human error, all should introduce noise. But the pulse cuts through it all, clean, synchronized, as if the signal doesn't care who's watching, as if it exists independent of us. That realization changes the emotional weight of everything, because if the phenomenon isn't observer-dependent, then it's not reacting. It's simply being. The room doesn't feel hostile. It feels small, and that's worse, because fear can be fought. Smallness cannot. Public curiosity grows. People sense something is happening, even without details. Social media fills the gaps with speculation. Some dismiss it as hype. Some jump to extremes. But scientists stay quiet. Not because they're hiding something, because they don't know what to say. Every statement feels incomplete. Every explanation feels dishonest. So they choose silence. And silence becomes part of the story. Because silence invites interpretation, and interpretation invites belief. But belief without understanding is dangerous. That's the fear now. Not aliens, not invasion, misunderstanding. The fear of naming something before we know what it is. Because names shape perception, and perception shapes response. Behind closed doors, a question circulates quietly. What if this object isn't extraordinary at all? What if it's simply ahead of us? Ahead in time, ahead in design, ahead in purpose. That idea is uncomfortable, because it suggests the universe may hold things that don't care if we understand them. Things that pass through our systems, leave traces, and move on. Unbothered by our confusion, as perihelion approaches, the data density increases. More measurements, more confirmation, the same impossible consistency. By now, doubt is no longer individual, it's collective, shared doubt, the kind that binds people together and leaves them staring at the same unanswered question. Science has done its job. It has observed, it has verified, it has agreed. Now it waits for understanding to catch up. But understanding doesn't come, and that leaves a void. Because when facts stop leading to explanations, belief looks for somewhere else to land. Some turn inward. They ask what it means to encounter something we didn't anticipate. Others look outward. They wonder what else might be moving through the dark, unnoticed. But one thought becomes impossible to ignore. If every observatory on Earth sees the same thing, then this isn't about flawed instruments. It's about flawed assumptions. We assumed interstellar objects would be ancient and broken. We assumed randomness. We assumed chaos. And 3I/Atlas has quietly challenged all of it. Not with force, not with drama, with consistency. And consistency is persuasive. As the chapter closes, the world stands in rare alignment. Same data, same mystery, no answers. And in that shared uncertainty, one question hangs heavier than all the others. When science agrees, but understanding collapses, do we hold on to belief, or do we finally admit that the universe may not be built to make sense to us at all? No one says it at first. The word sits at the edge of every conversation. Unspoken, heavy. Because some words change everything the moment they're spoken. And this is one of them. Artificial. It doesn't arrive in a meeting. It doesn't appear in a report. It slips in quietly in a late-night message, in a half-finished sentence. What if it's not natural? The room doesn't react right away. No gasps. No arguments. Just a pause, because everyone understands what that question means. Up to now, every explanation, no matter how strained, has stayed safely inside nature. Exotic ice, rare physics, unknown processes, comfortable ideas. But the patterns refuse to cooperate. The pulse keeps repeating. The heat keeps regulating. The surface keeps reflecting with intention-like calm. And nature doesn't do intention. Nature reacts. It doesn't plan. So when natural explanations begin to feel like excuses instead of answers, the forbidden word begins to feel inevitable. Artificial doesn't mean alien, not yet. It simply means made, designed, constructed, shaped by purpose instead of chance. That distinction matters. Because once you allow for artificiality, you open a door that cannot be closed. The first person to say it out loud does so carefully. They don't accuse. They don't declare. They ask, if this were artificial, what would it explain? And suddenly, too many things fall into place. The smooth reflectivity, the controlled thermal zones, the stable pulse. None of these prove design on their own. But together, they stop feeling random. They feel coordinated, like parts of a system. The conversation changes tone, voices lower, words become slower. Because now, every sentence feels dangerous. No one wants to be remembered as the person who overreached. History is unkind to those who jump too far ahead of evidence. But history is also unkind to those who refuse to see what's in front of them. Someone points out something uncomfortable. We've never seen an interstellar object like this. True, another adds quietly. And we've never seen one not like this, because we've barely seen any at all. Also true, the sample size is small. That's the shield. That's the defense. But it's a thin one. Because rarity doesn't explain behavior. It only explains why we haven't noticed before. The deeper question hangs in the air. If this is artificial, what kind of machine is it? Not a weapon. There's no aggression. Not a probe. There's no clear transmission. Not a ship. There's no maneuvering. It doesn't act. It persists. It regulates. It endures. Like something built to last, not to arrive. That leads to a more unsettling idea. What if this object wasn't sent to us? What if it wasn't sent at all? What if it's just passing through? A relic, a leftover, a machine with no mission except survival. That idea feels quieter than invasion stories, but also heavier. Because relics imply history, and history implies makers. Makers who are not here, or not now, or not interested. The question of origin becomes unavoidable. If something is artificial, it comes from somewhere. A star system, a civilization, a moment in time. But 3I/Atlas doesn't point back to anything. Its trajectory traces to emptiness, no home star, no obvious launch point, just a path through darkness, as if it's been drifting longer than memory, longer than cultures, longer than language, a machine without an origin story. That idea unsettles even the calmest minds. because machines are meant to be understood. They have blueprints, functions, limits, but this one doesn't offer any of that. It offers only behavior. And behavior without context is terrifying. The team circles back to caution. Artificial is a strong word, too strong. So they soften it. Non-natural processes, engineered like behavior. Unknown structured phenomena, long phrases to avoid a simple truth. But words don't change reality. They only delay acceptance. The most uncomfortable realization comes next. If this object is artificial, then it was built under rules we don't know, materials we don't recognize, priorities we don't share, and timescales we can't imagine. It may not be intelligent in the way we think. It may not be conscious. It may not even be active. But it could still be purposeful, like a seed drifting until conditions are right, like a vault designed to endure, or like a message that doesn't care if it's understood. That last thought changes everything, because messages don't need recipients. They only need persistence. And persistence is exactly what 3IATLAS has shown. The pulse doesn't demand attention. The thermal control doesn't announce itself. The reflectivity doesn't shout. It all whispers, as if subtlety is part of the design. As if the object expects to be overlooked, except by those who are patient enough to listen. That raises a chilling possibility. What if this isn't the first? What if it's just the first we noticed? How many others might be drifting silently, reflecting starlight, regulating heat, pulsing quietly in the dark? The universe is old. Older than fear, older than belief. If artificial objects can outlive their creators, then space may already be full of them. Not invading, not watching, just existing. That idea doesn't feel like science fiction. It feels like archaeology, cosmic ruins passing through our neighborhood. As perihelion draws closer, the object remains unchanged. No reaction to our curiosity, no response to our attention. It doesn't care that the question has been asked, and that may be the most honest clue of all. Because if this were meant to interact, it would. Instead, it continues doing exactly what it's always done, which suggests its purpose has nothing to do with us. The artificial question lingers now, not shouted, not denied, just present, like a shadow behind every graph. Science hasn't crossed a line, not officially, but something irreversible has happened. A boundary inside the human mind has shifted. Because once you allow for the possibility that something artificial can drift between stars, you can never fully close that door again. And now, as 3I/Atlas glides silently toward the sun, smooth, controlled, and unreadable, the universe feels a little less accidental than it did before. The question is no longer outrageous. It's simply waiting. If nature cannot explain the pattern, do we dare imagine a machine with no origin story, no message, and no need for our permission to exist? And if we do imagine it, are we prepared for what that says? Not about the universe, but about our place within it. Something changes. Not in the sky, but on Earth. In the early days, updates came often. Short briefings, careful charts, calm voices explaining what was known and what wasn't. Then the space between updates grows. Days pass, then weeks. Questions remain, but answers slow down. At first, no one notices. Silence is easy to miss when it arrives quietly, but curiosity has momentum, and 3IATLAS has already captured attention. Amateur astronomers talk, science forums light up, clips circulate, graphs are shared without context. People don't know what they're looking at, only that something doesn't feel normal. And they start asking, what is it made of? Why does it pulse? Why does it regulate heat? The questions are reasonable, but the responses change. Where once there were explanations, now there are statements. Short ones, carefully written, analysis ongoing, data inconclusive, no evidence of artificial origin. Each sentence feels less like information and more like containment. Press briefings become rare. When they do happen, the tone is flat. No curiosity, no wonder, just reassurance. This object poses no threat. No one asked if it did. That's the strange part. Fear isn't driving the public. Confusion is. And confusion wants clarity. But clarity doesn't come. Instead, details begin to vanish. Raw data is harder to find. Updates reference older reports. Technical terms replace explanations. The story slows, then stalls. That's when people notice the gaps. Because silence doesn't erase curiosity, it sharpens it. When officials stop talking, others start listening more closely. Listening to what isn't being said. The pulse is no longer mentioned. The thermal patterns are summarized, vaguely. Reflectivity is described as within acceptable variance. Acceptable to whom, no one explains. And that's when a quiet thought spreads. Not as an accusation, as a feeling. Something is being avoided, not hidden, just left alone, as if drawing attention to it might change something. Silence in science is unusual, not impossible, but unusual, because science thrives on discussion, on debate, on open disagreement. And here, disagreement has vanished, not resolved, just absent. Across agencies, language aligns. Statements sound similar, not copied, but harmonized, as if everyone agreed on what not to emphasize. That's unsettling, because agreement without explanation feels less like consensus and more like caution. People start asking harder questions. If there's nothing strange, why stop explaining? If it's just a rock, why treat it so carefully? If it's meaningless, why does every sentence feel rehearsed? No one claims conspiracy. Not yet. But trust bends under silence. Because humans fill empty spaces with meaning. Always have, always will. And the silence above feels deliberate. As if the absence of information is itself a choice. That idea connects back to the object. The pulse doesn't shout. The heat regulation doesn't flare. The reflectivity doesn't glare. Everything about 3I/Atlas is subtle, restrained, controlled. And now, the response from Earth mirrors that restraint. Careful, minimal, quiet, almost respectful, as if the people watching it don't want to disturb something. Or worse, don't want to provoke interpretation. Internal documents, later leaked, quietly show long email threads with no conclusions. Questions marked unresolved. Meetings summarized without decisions. No panic, just hesitation. And hesitation has a sound. It sounds like silence. One scientist says it best, years later. We weren't told to stop talking. We just ran out of things we could say with confidence. That sentence explains more than any official briefing. Because confidence matters. And confidence is gone. When data points to something unfamiliar, the safest option is to say less. Not because of fear, but because words can't be taken back. Once a possibility enters public consciousness, it never leaves. So silence becomes a shield. But shields reflect attention. They don't absorb it. The public doesn't feel protected by the silence. They feel excluded. And exclusion breeds suspicion. Online theories grow. Some are wild, some are thoughtful, some are emotional, but none are satisfied, because there is no anchor, no authoritative voice saying, "This is what it means." Just, "We're still looking." And eventually, we have nothing further to add. That phrase changes everything, because when nothing further is added, everything already said gains weight. Every earlier anomaly, every unexplained pattern, they don't disappear, they echo. Silence becomes part of the signal, not proof of anything, but presence. Like the pause in the light curve, like the thermal plateau, like the object itself, holding, waiting, unreactive. The idea creeps in slowly. What if silence is the correct response? What if saying too much would be wrong? Wrong not politically, but scientifically. Because naming something too early can trap understanding. It can limit interpretation. And if this object represents something entirely new, then old language might fail. Better to stay quiet than to be confidently incorrect. That's generous, comforting. But it doesn't explain everything, because curiosity doesn't stop. As 3I/Atlas nears perihelion, public attention peaks. People expect a moment, a reveal. Instead, nothing. No dramatic update. No bold statement. Just continued observation, quiet monitoring, silence. That's when a final, unsettling thought takes shape. What if silence isn't coming from Earth? What if it's echoing something learned from the object? 3I/Atlas doesn't communicate. It doesn't signal in obvious ways. It doesn't respond to attention. It exists and lets observation do the rest. Maybe the silence above is not avoidance. Maybe it's alignment. A recognition that not everything announces itself, that some things are not meant to be explained quickly, that some discoveries don't arrive with instructions, they arrive with patience. Still, that's hard to accept, because humans are storytellers. We crave narrative, beginning, middle, end, and silence interrupts that flow. It leaves the story unfinished. As the object reaches its closest point to the sun, still pulsing, still regulating, still unreadable, the lack of explanation becomes louder than any announcement. Because now everyone is watching, and no one is speaking. Silence has joined the data. It has become another pattern, another anomaly, another thing that doesn't behave the way we expect. And that leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. When silence becomes part of the signal, how do we tell the difference between not knowing and choosing not to say? Because one is honest, and the other changes everything. At some point, fear changes its shape. It stops being loud. It stops being dramatic. And it becomes quiet. By now, no one is talking about invasion. No fleets. No attacks. No warnings from the sky. that story fades quickly. Because nothing about 3I/Atlas feels aggressive. It doesn't rush. It doesn't turn. It doesn't react. If anything, it feels indifferent. And that indifference is far more unsettling. Because it forces a different kind of question. Not, what will it do to us? But, what have we been wrong about all along? This is where perception begins to crack. Scientists aren't afraid of threats. They're trained for danger. What they're afraid of is being fundamentally mistaken. Mistaken about how the universe works. Mistaken about what is possible. Mistaken about the assumptions that quietly shaped every equation. Up until now, there was comfort in randomness. Chaos was reassuring. It meant no one was in control. It meant the universe wasn't watching, wasn't planning, wasn't leaving artifacts behind. But 3I/Atlas doesn't fit chaos. It fits persistence, and persistence forces reflection. Philosophers begin to speak up, not loudly, but carefully. They don't argue about what the object is. They ask what it means. If something artificial can drift silently between stars, without purpose we recognize, without interaction, without announcement, then the universe might be full of things we never learned how to notice. That thought lands heavily because perception isn't passive. It's shaped by culture, by expectation, by what we believe is worth seeing. For centuries, humans looked at the sky and saw stories, gods, omens, destiny. Then science taught us to see mechanics, gravity, fusion, motion. We replaced myth with math, and for a long time that worked. But now, something sits between the two. Not myth, not machine in the way we understand it. Something older than our stories, and quieter than our equations. The fear isn't that we're being watched. The fear is that we've been surrounded by meaning, and never developed the senses to recognize it. One philosopher writes, something unsettling. If intelligence leaves traces that don't seek attention, then our definition of discovery is flawed. That sentence spreads because it cuts deep. Discovery has always assumed intent. Someone sends a message, something explodes, something moves unnaturally. But what if intelligence doesn't need to announce itself? What if it leaves behind structures, systems, objects that persist quietly, like fossils in motion? Then intelligence wouldn't look like science fiction. It would look like background noise, like something we filtered out because it didn't match our expectations. That idea is uncomfortable for scientists, not because it's mystical, but because it's humbling. It suggests that our tools are not wrong, but our questions might be. 3I/Atlas didn't break physics. It followed it perfectly. That's the problem. It followed physics too well. As if physics wasn't an obstacle, but a language it was built to speak. That realization reframes everything. The reflectivity wasn't strange, it was efficient. The thermal regulation wasn't unnatural, it was protective. The pulse wasn't a message, it was maintenance. Suddenly, the object feels less like a visitor and more like infrastructure. And infrastructure doesn't care who notices it. It exists to endure. That thought bends perception in a dangerous way, because infrastructure implies scale. It implies planning beyond individuals, beyond generations, beyond civilizations. If something like this exists, then it suggests a universe where intelligence doesn't just appear, it accumulates, quietly, over time, leaving behind things that outlast their creators, the same way our satellites may outlive us, the same way ruins outlast empires. Except this time, the ruins move. That's when the deepest fear emerges. Not fear of aliens, fear of insignificance. If the universe holds artifacts that don't care whether we understand them, then humanity might not be early, or special, or central. We might just be observers who arrived late. Philosophers call this an epistemic shock, a moment when knowledge itself feels unstable, when the frameworks we trusted begin to feel thin. Science isn't failing. It's doing exactly what it should. But it's revealing a boundary, a line beyond which explanation becomes interpretation. And interpretation makes people uncomfortable, because interpretation admits uncertainty. And uncertainty invites humility. That humility spreads. Scientists become cautious with language. Philosophers become cautious with certainty. Even skeptics soften their tone, because denial requires confidence, and confidence is gone. Instead, there's something else. Re-evaluation. People begin asking broader questions. What else have we dismissed as noise? What other anomalies were smoothed out, ignored, archived? How many signals were labeled instrument error because they didn't fit? How many patterns were erased because randomness was easier? The universe hasn't changed, but our relationship with it has. 3I/Atlas doesn't dominate the sky. It doesn't glow. It doesn't demand worship or fear. It simply exists, and that existence challenges perception. It forces a realization. Intelligence doesn't have to look like us. It doesn't have to speak. It doesn't have to arrive. It can drift. It can endure. It can remain silent and still reshape how we see everything else. That's the breaking point. Not emotionally, conceptually, because once you accept that possibility, you can never fully trust absence again. Empty space may not be empty. Silence may not be meaningless. Randomness may not be random. And the universe may not be as blind as we once believed. As 3I/Atlas continues past its closest approach, unchanged and uninterested, the world watches with a different kind of attention. Not expectation, reflection. The object didn't answer our questions. It replaced them. And now, the most unsettling thought settles in. If this object is real and intentional and older than our understanding, then the universe has been holding truths we never learned how to see. And that means the greatest discovery here is not what 3I/Atlas is. It's what it reveals about us, about our limits, about our assumptions, about how much of reality may have passed silently through our awareness while we were looking for the wrong signs. Perception has begun to break, not because the universe is hostile, but because it is vast, patient, and under no obligation to make sense to us. And once that realization takes hold, there is no returning to the comfort of ignorance. Only forward into a universe that suddenly feels far more intentional and far less familiar than it ever did before. As 3I/Atlas moves closer to the sun, time begins to feel different. Not faster, not slower, heavier. Every calculation now circles the same moment, perihelion, the point of closest approach. The place where pressure peaks, where radiation is strongest, where weak things break. This is where comets fracture, where ice boils away, where hidden flaws finally show themselves. If 3I/Atlas is just a traveler, this is where it should stumble. But instead, its patterns sharpen. The pulse becomes cleaner, not louder, more precise. The pauses shorten, the rhythm tightens. Like a machine syncing its timing, the light curve no longer drifts, it locks. Each rise and fall arrives closer to expectation, as if uncertainty is being removed. That shouldn't happen. Approaching the sun should introduce chaos. Heat, radiation, gravitational stress, but chaos is fading. Structure is emerging. The thermal regulation grows more efficient. Temperature swings narrow. Hot zones stabilize. The object isn't struggling. It's adapting. And adaptation implies anticipation. That realization changes the emotional weight of everything, because this doesn't look like survival. It looks like preparation. The data now feels directional, not random behavior reacting to stress, but systems aligning toward a moment. Scientists notice something subtle and chilling. The pulse timing aligns with perihelion projections. Not perfectly, but close enough to raise eyebrows, as if the object's internal rhythm is referencing its position. As if distance from the sun matters, not just physically, but operationally. Someone says it quietly. It's like a countdown. No one laughs, because the metaphor fits too well. A clock approaching zero doesn't speed up dramatically. It becomes precise, exact. Every second matters. That's what the data feels like now. Exact. As the sun grows larger in every telescope frame, 3I/Atlas doesn't flare. It doesn't shed mass. It doesn't distort. It holds its shape. Its reflectivity remains stable, almost defensive, redirecting energy away rather than absorbing it. Like shielding, like intent. And here's the part that unsettles everyone. Nothing new is happening, no sudden reveal, no dramatic maneuver, just refinement. The systems we already saw are becoming better at what they do, which raises a disturbing possibility. What if this object was always meant to reach this point? What if everything before this was just transit, the journey between stars, the long silence, the drifting? All of it a lead-up, not to arrival, but to activation. The word is dangerous, so no one uses it officially, but everyone feels it. The object doesn't behave like something discovering a new environment. It behaves like something returning to a familiar one, as if it has been here before, as if stars are not obstacles, but stations. That thought is hard to sit with, because it reframes scale. Civilizations rise and fall in thousands of years. Stars burn for billions. Anything built to interact with stars is built on a timeline that ignores us completely. As perihelion approaches, observation intensity peaks. Every instrument is watching. Not because they expect something to happen, but because they're afraid of missing it if it does. And yet, nothing dramatic occurs. The pulse continues. The heat regulates. The surface holds. No fireworks, no message, just presence. That restraint becomes the loudest signal of all. Because whatever this is, it doesn't need spectacle. It doesn't need witnesses. It only needs conditions. And conditions are being met. That's when a quiet realization lands. Waiting doesn't mean inactivity. It means patience. And patience implies foresight. The object isn't reacting to perihelion. It's aligning with it, like a key turning slowly in a lock, click by click. The closer it gets, the less it feels accidental. And the less accidental it feels, the harder it becomes to see it as passive. A rock doesn't wait. Debris doesn't count. But systems do, machines do. As 3IATLAS reaches the threshold, where sunlight is harshest, where gravity is strongest, the patterns reach their tightest form. Nothing activates. Nothing changes visibly. And yet, everything feels different. Because the countdown ends and nothing breaks. No failure, no collapse, only continuity. The object passes perihelion intact, unaffected, unimpressed, as if this moment, the one we feared, predicted, centered everything around, was never the goal, just a checkpoint. And that realization is the most unsettling of all. Because if perihelion wasn't the moment, then the moment may still be ahead. Somewhere else, some other condition, some other alignment. The awakening pattern doesn't announce itself with action. It announces itself with completion, systems tested, stress endured, readiness confirmed. And readiness implies the future. As 3IATLAS begins its journey outward, the data doesn't loosen. The pulse remains. The regulation holds. The object doesn't relax. It stays alert, as if passing the sun wasn't an ending, but a qualification. And now, the question that no one wants to ask becomes impossible to avoid. If this object wasn't just passing through, if it wasn't just surviving, if it wasn't just drifting, then what exactly was it waiting for? Because waiting only makes sense when something is meant to come next. And as 3IATLAS moves away from the sun, quiet, intact, and unchanged, one thought echoes louder than all the data. This wasn't a random encounter. This was a pattern reaching its 0 point. And whatever comes after 0 has never needed our permission to begin. Nothing happens. That's the ending no one expected, and no one knows how to accept. After perihelion, after the tightening patterns, after the quiet sense of anticipation, 3IATLAS simply continues on its path. No signal bursts, no sudden maneuver, no final reveal. It moves away from the sun the same way it arrived, calm, intact, and unreadable. The pulse remains for a while, then slowly weakens, not abruptly, not dramatically, like a system easing into a lower state. The thermal regulation relaxes just enough to notice. Still controlled, still deliberate, but quieter now. As days turn into weeks, the object grows fainter, harder to track, easier to lose. Eventually, it becomes just another dim point among millions. And then it's gone, not destroyed, not transformed, just distant, drifting back into the dark between stars. No message was sent, no origin was revealed, no explanation arrived to save us from uncertainty. Only data remains, charts, graphs, archived observations, and questions stacked quietly on top of one another. At first, there's disappointment. Humans like closure. We expect answers to follow, curiosity. We expect mystery to reward attention. But the universe has never promised that. In the weeks after 3IATLAS fades from view, discussions slow, Papers are published carefully. Language stays cautious. Unexplained, anomalous, inconclusive. No one claims victory. No one claims certainty. The object slips into history, not as a solved problem, but as a reference point. A marker, something before and something after, because even without answers, something fundamental has shifted. The way we look at the sky feels different now, not dramatic, subtle, but permanent. Every future discovery will pass through the shadow of this one. Every strange curve will be compared. Every odd pattern re-examined. Because 3I/Atlas taught us something uncomfortable. That observation does not guarantee understanding, and understanding is not owed to us. Some philosophers write that this is the most honest outcome, that a universe willing to surprise us, but unwilling to explain itself, may be the most realistic one of all. Because meaning doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it passes quietly, leaving only the choice of how we respond. The most unsettling idea begins to take shape, not quickly, but steadily. What if discovery was never the point? What if this object wasn't meant to teach us anything specific? No warning, no greeting, no lessons spelled out. Just existence, just endurance, just proof. Proof that the universe may contain things that do not care about our narratives. Things that are not curious about us, but are not unaware either. The phrase, watches back, enters conversation. Not literally, not as eyes, not as intention in the human sense, but as symmetry. We observed it. It observed nothing and everything. Because to exist long enough to be found is already a kind of interaction. 3I/Atlas did not react to our attention, but it did not hide from it either. It allowed itself to be seen, and then moved on. That balance is what lingers. The idea that something can pass through our world, reveal its presence through patterns and restraint, and leave without explanation, as if acknowledgement was enough. Some scientists describe a strange feeling they can't quite name. Not fear, not wonder. Respect, because whatever this object was, it operated on scales we do not control, times we do not live in, purposes we may never grasp. And yet, it intersected with us, briefly, long enough to be noticed, long enough to be questioned. And then it was gone. That raises the final, haunting possibility. What if being noticed was the interaction? What if the act of observation itself was the completion of its journey? Not a message, but a mirror. A way for the universe to reflect us back at ourselves, our assumptions, our confidence, our limits. 3I/Atlas didn't tell us who made it, if anyone did. It didn't tell us why it existed. It didn't even confirm that artificiality was the right question. Instead, it forced a deeper one. How much of reality have we ignored simply because it didn't ask for our attention? The sky hasn't changed. Stars still burn. Planets still orbit. Comets still flare. But now, every quiet object carries a different weight. Every anomaly is examined more slowly, because we've learned that silence doesn't mean emptiness, and distance doesn't mean irrelevance. The universe didn't answer us, but it didn't need to. It showed us something far more difficult to accept, that we are not the center of meaning. We are participants in a much older story, one that continues whether we understand it or not. As 3I/Atlas fades into interstellar night, it leaves behind no warning, no promise, no proof we can hold on to, only perspective. And perspective changes everything. The final truth is not about aliens or machines or hidden civilizations. It's about humility, about realizing that discovery is not always a reward. Sometimes it's a challenge. A challenge to our belief that knowledge arrives neatly. A challenge to our comfort with explanation. A challenge to the idea that the universe exists to be understood on our terms. Maybe 3I/Atlas was never meant to speak. Maybe it was never meant to activate. Maybe it was never meant to do anything at all, except persist. And in that persistence, it asked the only question that truly matters. If something can exist, move through stars, and leave without explanation, are we brave enough to accept that understanding is not guaranteed? Because the unknown didn't threaten us. It didn't warn us. It didn't reveal itself. It simply passed by and reminded us that the universe does not revolve around discovery. Discovery revolves around us. And sometimes, the most profound encounters are the ones that leave us with nothing to hold on to, except the quiet realization that the unknown was never waiting to be found. It was watching back, long before we ever learned how to look.